On the 30th day, Elliot Grace knelt on the cafeteria floor and took bread from a killer's hand with his teeth. 200 men sat frozen at their welded steel tables, watching a 19-year-old skeleton feed like a dog before them. The fluorescent lights hummed their eternal hum, and not a single fork moved from a single tray across that room of silence. His hands did not tremble, and that was the detail that should have told everyone in that cafeteria everything they needed to know. Remember this moment, because in exactly 24 hours, everything inside this building will flip upside down and shatter into pieces forever. A black government Chevrolet Suburban will roll through those gates, and the man standing over Elliot will leave in handcuffs through this cafeteria. The skinny kid every inmate in Block D called Floor Boy will walk out the front gate into autumn sunlight carrying absolutely nothing. But to understand how a 137-pound teenager brought down the most dangerous man in federal prison, you need context. Before you hear the rest, I need you to ask yourselves one question and drop your honest answer in the comments below right now. Could you eat off a concrete floor for 30 days straight if you knew it would destroy the people who put you there and subscribe now? 30 days earlier, a white transport bus with caged windows ground to a halt outside the Federal Correctional Institution at El Reno, Oklahoma. The doors folded open, and autumn air hit Elliot Grace like a wall of wet rust and diesel fumes pouring through the gap. He stepped down in ankle chains, and his sneakers touched Oklahoma dirt for the first time in his entire short, broken life. He stood 5'8" and weighed 137 pounds soaking wet, which he practically was from nervous sweat pooling everywhere. A faded burn scar wrapped around his left wrist like a bracelet given to him by a foster home that taught him about cigarettes. He was 19 years old, convicted on a minor narcotics possession charge that his foster brother had engineered to save his own worthless skin. The processing room smelled of chlorine and industrial soapy, and something underneath both that no amount of chemical could ever fully mask. A guard handed him a bedroll and a number, and never once looked at his face, because faces did not matter here at all. The fluorescent tubes above buzzed at a frequency that would never stop, not during meals, not during sleep, not during the worst moments, yet ahead. They walked him down a corridor so long, the end of it dissolved into a pale green vanishing point that seemed to breathe and pulse. Every door he passed through closed behind him with a metallic bark that echoed off concrete walls painted the color of old teeth and regret. Block D held between 80 and 120 men at any given time, and today it held 106 plus Elliot Grace. He could feel eyes on him before he even crossed the threshold, like heat from an open oven door pressing against his skin from every direction. Someone whistled low, and someone else laughed, and someone else said nothing at all, which was somehow the most terrifying sound of everything. His cell was 6 by 9 with a metal bunk, a steel toilet, and a window slit that showed a strip of gray Oklahoma sky. He set his bedroll on the top bunk and sat down, and the mattress was thinner than the folder that held his sentencing documents back home. That first night, someone screamed 2 blocks away, and the scream went on for 11 seconds and then stopped like a faucet turning off cleanly. Elliot lay on his back, staring at a ceiling that was closer than any ceiling he had ever slept under in 19 years of life. Day 2 began at 5:45, with a buzzer that sounded like a mechanical animal dying somewhere inside the walls of the building. Elliot followed the herd to the cafeteria, a 200-seat room with metal benches welded to the floor and trays that smelled of yesterday. He picked up his tray, got his portion of rice and beans and powdered eggs, and turned to find a seat among the strangers. That was when the air in the room shifted the way air shifts, when a large predator enters a space full of smaller breathing things. Marcus Big Six Salazar stood 6'4" and carried 260 pounds of muscle and authority across that cafeteria floor like a walking monument. A Roman numeral 6 was tattooed on his neck, marking the 6 years of his first sentence when he was born again into power. He did not scream or threaten or even raise his voice, because men who truly control rooms never need to raise their voices at all. He walked to Elliot and with one hand swept the tray off the table and the food scattered across wet chlorine-scented concrete below. The words came out flat and mechanical, like a policy being read aloud at a staff meeting. "Dogs eat on the floor," he said simply. 200 pairs of eyes locked onto the skinny new kid standing above his scattered rice and beans on that wet cafeteria concrete floor. Not one man moved, and not one fork scraped, and not one throat cleared, because everyone in that room understood exactly what was happening. This was not cruelty for the sake of cruelty, it was architecture. And Big Six was the architect of order inside Block D every day. Elliot looked left and saw faces turning away, and he looked right and saw faces that were already eating again as though nothing happened. His knees hit the concrete, and the sound was small and wet, like a hand clapping against a damp wall in an empty room somewhere. He ate with his fingers off the floor, and the rice was cold and gritty with chlorine residue and something that might have been dirt. The burnt oil smell from the kitchen mixed with the bleach smell from the floor, and together they created the specific flavor of absolute humiliation. Big Six watched for exactly 12 seconds and then turned and walked back to his table, where 4 men made space for him like water parting. Elliot stayed on his knees until every grain was gone, because something inside him understood that standing up early would cost him more. Days 3 through 7 carved a groove into reality so deep that it began to feel like the only reality that had ever existed before. Every single lunch, the same tray hit the same floor and the same words came out, and Elliot went to his knees like clockwork before everyone. By day 4, the name Floor Boy had spread through Block D like a virus, jumping from mouth to mouth to mouth across the cells. Some inmates looked away when it happened, because looking meant acknowledging, and acknowledging meant choosing, and choosing meant risk inside these walls. Others laughed openly, because laughter was a currency that bought you distance from the person on the floor, being broken down to nothing. On day 5, a correctional officer named Travis Dunn, 29 years old, former Marine, 11 months on the job, walked past the scene. He looked down at the floor where Elliot knelt, and his jaw tightened, and his pace increased, and he was gone around the corner. He did not know yet that this moment was being filed away in a place where moments become evidence that destroys entire careers forever. Warden Roy Beckett sat in his office 3 buildings away, signing reports that read 0 incidents because Big Six kept the violence invisible. The system did not run on money here, it ran on convenience, and every averted gaze was a signature on an unwritten contract of corruption. On the 7th night, Elliot lay on a bare metal bunk frame because Big Six's people had taken his mattress 2 days earlier as tribute. He stared at the ceiling, and the fluorescent light that never fully shut off painted everything in a sick, pale blue that erased all shadows. His knuckles were raw from the cafeteria floor, and his knees had bruises on top of bruises layered like geological strata beneath his skin. Somewhere in another block, a man was singing something in Spanish, and the melody came through the vents, thin and distorted and almost beautiful. The previous federal informant planted inside El Reno had broken on day 9 and ended up in the medical ward with a shattered jaw. But Elliot did not know that yet, because he did not know he would become an informant, and he did not know anything at all. All he knew was the taste of concrete and chlorine and cold rice, and the sound of 200 men choosing silence over decency every day. The narrator knows what comes next, but Elliot on that 7th night knew only that tomorrow would be day 8 and identical to today. He closed his eyes, and the fluorescent hum filled the space where sleep should have been like water, filling a hole that keeps getting deeper. Day 8 broke the pattern, but not in any direction Elliot could have predicted or prepared himself for inside that block. The prison library was a forgotten room with warped shelves and books that smelled of mildew and abandoned human ambition rotting. Elliot sat alone at a metal table, reading nothing, just staring at pages, because pages did not stare back at him. That was when Derek Preacher Washington lowered himself into the opposite chair, like a man settling into a church pew quietly. He was 52 years old, with silver hair cropped close and a frame that had been whittled thin by 18 years inside. His eyes held something that did not belong in federal prison, a kind of gravity that made silence feel intentional and almost sacred. He had been convicted of involuntary manslaughter, a former pastor who carried his sentence like a congregation carries grief through winter without end. Yerk's Big Six never touched him, and nobody in Block D could fully explain why, except that some men radiate a weight. Preacher set a paperback on the table between them, pushed it forward with 2 fingers, and left without one single word spoken. The book was Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, and its spine was cracked in 30 places by 30 different desperate hands. Elliot opened it that night under the fluorescent glow that painted his cell in permanent sickly blue light without shadows. He read a line about suffering being bearable when it serves something larger than the body that contains it inside. But that was night and morning, always came with the buzzer and the cafeteria and the wet concrete waiting for his knees. Day 9. Big Six added a new element to the ritual that nobody in the cafeteria expected, but everyone immediately understood completely. After the tray hit the floor and Elliot knelt down, Big Six said, "Now you say thank you out loud today." 200 men heard Elliot whisper thank you to the man who had just thrown his food onto bleach-stained concrete. By day 10, the words came automatically, like a recording playing inside a body that had stopped containing a person altogether. The block adjusted, and the adjustment was the worst part because it meant the extraordinary had become ordinary background noise. Day 11, and something inside Elliot began shutting down. Not with drama, but with the quiet efficiency of a building condemned. Inside, Elliot lights were going off room by room, like a house being prepared for demolition by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He still read Seneca at night, but the words bounced off whatever wall was thickening between him and the ability to feel. He ate from the floor and said thank you and returned to his cell and lay on bare metal and stared at nothing. The other inmates had stopped even registering the ritual because cruelty observed long enough becomes furniture in the room of daily life. Preacher watched from 3 tables away during every single lunch, and his expression never changed, but his hands gripped his tray harder. Travis Dunn walked past the cafeteria door on day 11, looked in for exactly 2 seconds, and kept walking toward his quiet paycheck. The fluorescent hum filled every silence and every gap and every space where a human thought might have grown into something resembling hope. But the emptiness spreading through Elliot was not the end of his story. It was the ground being cleared for something else entirely. Day 12. Elliot sat on the edge of his bottom bunk at 2:14 in the morning and looked up at the top frame. His brain performed a calculation with clinical precision, measuring the height, the drop, the angle, the probability of a clean result without error. The answer came back insufficient, and his brain filed it away the same way it filed the lunch schedule and the guard rotations. He was not sad in that moment, and he was not angry, and he was not afraid, because all 3 required energy he no longer had. His eyes traced the metal frame joint by joint, bolt by bolt, like an engineer surveying a bridge he might need later sometime. Stop right here, because this is the exact moment where most people either break completely or do something that cannot be undone. On this precise night, at this precise hour, in this precise cell, the trajectory of Elliot Grace turned toward something no one expected. He did not know it yet because the person who would change everything had not yet walked through the visitor room door. 12 days of concrete floors and forced gratitude had stripped him down to a foundation, and that foundation was about to hold weight. Day 14. A guard told Elliot his lawyer was waiting in the visitation room, and Elliot did not have a lawyer at all. The room was small, with a metal table bolted down and 2 chairs and a camera in the corner with its red light off. The woman sitting across from him was 41 years old Korean American, with a jaw that looked like it had been set permanently against nonsense. Her name was Karen Tsoi, special agent with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and she carried no briefcase, only a folder. She looked at his hands first, the knuckles scraped raw, the fingernails cracked and stained with cafeteria floor residue from 12 days down. "I know what they are doing to you," she said, and her voice was level. But something underneath it was not level at all. "I have a proposal, and you can say no and walk back to Block D and nothing changes, and nobody will judge you for it. But if you say yes, then everything you have endured in there will have meaning and purpose beyond just surviving another day of it." She opened the folder, and inside was a photograph of another young man with a wired jaw and vacant eyes who had lasted 9 days. His name was David Morales, and he had been planted inside El Reno 4 months before Elliot arrived as a federal informant for them. He broke on day 9 when Big Six discovered something off about his behavior, and the resulting beating fractured his jaw in 3 places. Tsoi explained the operation with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this pitch while knowing a life depended on every word. The target was not just Big Six, but the entire architecture of corruption from Warden Roy Beckett down to every guard who looked away. So every averted gaze, every silent lunch, every mattress stolen was a civil rights violation that could be prosecuted under federal statute if documented. They needed someone inside who could carry a recording device and survive long enough to capture 30 days of systematic institutional abuse. They had watched Elliot for 8 days through Preacher through channels she did not fully explain, and they chose him for one reason. He did not break, and in a place designed to break people that made him the most valuable person inside this entire facility. Elliot did not answer immediately, but looked at his hands and the knuckles scraped against concrete, and asked only one quiet question. What happens to the people who watched and did nothing every single day while I was on that cafeteria floor eating? Tsoi held his gaze and said, "They go down too. Every guard, every administrator, every person who signed a report that said 0 incidents. Elliot nodded once, and that nod contained 19 years of foster homes, and silence, and burn scars, and being treated like furniture by everyone. The device was smaller than a coin, embedded in the sole of his left boot, activated by pressure pattern, and recording everything around him. Days 15 through 18 passed with the same ritual, the same concrete, the same thank you, spoken to a man who would eventually hear it played. But now, every word Big Six said was evidence, and every guard who walked past was being documented, and every silence was a recorded confession. Preacher sat with Elliot in the library on day 16 and said one sentence that would echo through the rest of this story forever. Patience without purpose is just suffering, but patience with purpose is strategy. And Elliot understood that Preacher somehow knew everything already. On the 18th night, Elliot lay on bare metal with a device in his boot that could destroy careers and free prisoners and change everything. But in exactly 6 days, a 22-year-old named Ricky would notice he was still wearing his old shoes, and then the longest 4 minutes of his life would begin. Days 19 through 23 proved that Big Six was never satisfied, because predators do not stop at enough, they stop at everything. The cafeteria ritual was just the foundation, and now Big Six built an entire cathedral of control on top of Elliot's bent spine. Monday, he handed Elliot a garbage bag full of his dirty laundry and said, "Wash these by lights out or sleep standing." Tuesday, Elliot knelt in the yard, scrubbing Big Six's boots with a toothbrush, while 40 men played basketball around him, pretending. Wednesday, Big Six sat playing cards with 3 lieutenants and pointed at the floor beside his chair like commanding a dog. Elliot knelt there for 2 hours and 17 minutes, serving as a human footrest, while Big Six rested his size 13 shoes. This was not madness, and this was not chaos, because Big Six understood something most people never learn about the mechanics of power. You do not control a block by being the most violent person inside it. You control it by making submission feel inevitable. Every man watching Elliot scrub those boots was really watching his own future. If he ever stepped outside the lines Big Six drew. On the 21st night at 11:47, Travis Dunn walked past Elliot's cell and stopped like a man hitting glass. He stood there for 9 seconds, which is longer than you think, when silence is the only sound between two people. "Hang in there, kid," he said. And his voice cracked on the word kid, like a bone snapping under pressure. Elliot turned his head slowly and looked at Dunn with eyes that held nothing readable behind them. Not gratitude, not contempt, not anything. Dunn opened his mouth again, as if more words were forming somewhere inside his chest, trying to climb toward the surface. But nothing came out, and his boots carried him away down the corridor and around the corner and into comfortable forgetting once again. That moment was recorded, and those 2 words, "hang in there," would cost Travis Dunn his badge, his pension, and his freedom. Not for cruelty, because cruelty requires action, and Dunn never raised a hand against anyone inside those walls at all. He fell for something quieter and more common. He knew, and he saw, and he chose to look away every single time. Day 24 started like every other day, but by noon, it would contain the 4 most dangerous minutes of this story. Ricky Salinas, 22 years old. Big Six's youngest lieutenant noticed something that nobody else in Block D had ever bothered noticing. Elliot was still wearing his original intake boots, even though commissary had issued him a replacement pair 11 days earlier, sitting untouched. Ricky mentioned this to Big Six during lunch, and Big Six's eyes narrowed the way a door narrows when it starts closing. "Go get his boots," Big Six said. And Ricky stood up and walked toward Block D, and Elliot saw him coming. 3 minutes and 40 seconds, that was the distance between the cafeteria and Elliot's cell, measured in Ricky's footsteps and heartbeats. Elliot moved first, walking fast, not running, because running draws eyes, and eyes draw questions that have no safe answers. He reached his cell, and his fingers found the left boot and pressed the heel sideways, and the sole cracked open like a secret. The device was the size of an aspirin tablet, black matte surface, warm from 30 days of body heat and evidence and everything. 3 minutes, 20 seconds, and Ricky's boots echoed in the corridor, getting louder with each step like a countdown made of leather. Elliot's eyes swept the cell, searching for a place that hands would not think to check during a casual search. The ventilation grate was too obvious, and the toilet tank was the first place anyone looked, and the mattress was gone. 2 minutes, 40 seconds, and his fingers found the metal seam where the bunk frame met the wall, a gap thinner than thought. He pressed the device into the gap, and the metal held it by friction alone, which meant faith was the only adhesive available. 2 minutes, 10 seconds, and he pressed his thumb against the spot, testing whether it would fall, and it held barely enough. He placed the old boots by the door and stood in the center of his cell barefoot on cold concrete with nothing on his face. Ricky appeared in the doorway, breathing slightly hard from the walk, and looked at Elliot, and then looked at the boots and picked them up. He turned the boots over, examined the soles, squeezed the heels, and found nothing because there was nothing left to find inside them anymore. Ricky stared at Elliot for 6 seconds, and suspicion moved across his face like a cloud crossing a field. but clouds pass. He left with the boots, and Elliot stood barefoot on concrete. And his heartbeat was so loud, it seemed to vibrate the walls. 4 minutes, and that was the difference between a federal operation that would free dozens and a body bag with no name. The narrator needs you to understand that Elliot did not exhale dramatically or collapse against the wall like they do in movies. He simply stood there because people who grow up in foster care learn that relief is just the space between one danger and the next. That night, he lay on bare metal with no boots and no mattress, and a device hidden in a gap held by nothing but friction. The fluorescent hum filled the cell, and somewhere in the building, Big Six was examining old boots and finding nothing but worn leather. But Elliot's hands trembled for the first time in 30 days, not from fear, but from the adrenaline finally having nowhere to go. He pressed his palms flat against the metal frame and held them there until the shaking stopped, because shaking was a luxury. Day 26, and Preacher sat down across from Elliot in the library and opened a book he did not read. He looked at Elliot over the top of the pages and said one word that landed like a stone dropped into still water. Soon, and the word hung between them, carrying the weight of 18 years of letters written to an agency that never answered. Elliot understood in that single syllable that Preacher had always known, because Preacher was the reason any of this existed. Years of letters to the Department of Justice documenting every beating, every stolen mattress, every zero incident report signed by liars. Nobody listened because nobody listens to a convicted man writing from a cell about things that comfortable people prefer not knowing about. Until Karen Soy opened one of those letters and cross-referenced it with David Morales' broken jaw, and suddenly everything connected. 2 inmates sat in a prison library, sharing a silence that meant more than any conversation either had ever had before. 2 men who would never be friends on the outside, because one of them would never see the outside, but something existed. Day 29. Big Six stood in the center of Block D and announced tomorrow was graduation day for Floor Boy. He did not explain what graduation meant, but the way he smiled told every man in that block it meant something worse. The block hummed with anticipation, the way a stadium hums before a fight that everyone came specifically to watch and remember. Big Six did not know that this was his last evening in Block D as a free man walking under his own power. He was planning a celebration, and fate was planning something else entirely, and only one of those plans would survive morning. Day 30 arrived, and the cafeteria filled, and Elliot walked to his usual spot, and Big Six was already standing there, waiting. "Today you eat from my hands," Big Six said, and he held a piece of bread out like a man offering communion to something beneath him. 200 men went silent, and the fluorescent hum became the only sound in a room built to hold noise and violence and broken people. Elliot raised his head slowly and looked Big Six directly in the eyes, and what Big Six saw there, he could not read at all. Not hatred, and not submission, and not fear, but something that sat behind all 3 like a door that had been locked from the inside. Or Elliot took the bread with his teeth from Big Six's hand, and Big Six smiled because he believed this was the final proof of total surrender. But he was looking into the eyes of the only person in that building who knew exactly how this story ended tomorrow morning. Day 31 began with engine noise and a black Chevrolet Suburban rolling through the gates carrying federal plates and federal authority. Warden Roy Beckett ran from his office, and his face was the color of paper that has been left in rain too long. Federal marshals moved through Block D like a weather system, and Big Six was extracted from his cell in handcuffs and walked. They walked him through the cafeteria, on purpose past every welded table, past every bench, past the exact floor where Elliot bled. Or Elliot was escorted to the warden's office, where Karen Soy sat waiting and Beckett sat handcuffed, and the world had inverted completely. Big Six received 12 additional years, and 3 correctional officers were arrested, and Beckett was suspended pending federal criminal charges against him. Travis Dunn stood in the corridor and watched Elliot walk past him a free man, and his mouth opened, but no words came. Elliot did not stop and did not look at him, because some silences are sentences, and Dunn had earned every syllable of his. But here is the twist, beneath the twist, the layer that changes everything you thought you understood about this entire story. Elliot Grace was never a planted agent, and he was never recruited before arriving, and he had no connection to federal law enforcement. He was a real inmate serving a real 14-month sentence for a real charge that his foster brother had pinned on him. The DOJ found him inside because preachers' letters described a kid who would not break, and they needed exactly that specific kind. They approached him on day 14 because he survived what their trained operative could not survive past day 9 at all. His strength was not manufactured in a training facility, it was forged by 19 years of foster homes, and silence and survival. And that is the question that will not let me sleep at night, should any human being ever need to be that strong. Elliot walked through the main gates of FCY El Reno into October sunlight, carrying nothing in his hands and nothing on his feet. The black SUV waited with its engine running, and Karen Tsoi stood beside it, watching him cross the threshold between 2 different lives. He stopped 3 steps past the gate and looked down at his hands, turning them over slowly, like reading a document written on skin. The knuckles were thick with calluses built by 30 days of concrete floors and cold rice and chlorine, and forced gratitude spoken aloud. He closed his fists slowly, and the calluses stretched tight across bone and tendon, and 30 days of recorded human cruelty and institutional silence. Then he opened them, and this was not a gesture of victory, but a test to check whether his hands still felt anything. Tsoi's words echoed somewhere behind his eyes. What they did to you will not disappear when you walk out past these gates. He climbed into the SUV, and the door closed, and the vehicle pulled away from a building that had tried to make him nothing. Justice was served, and corruption was exposed, but the cost was written on his knuckles and carved into his knees and living somewhere behind those gray eyes that finally looked straight ahead. And the real question, the one I need every single person watching this to carry with them tonight, is how many Elliot Graces are kneeling on cafeteria floors right now in prisons you will never see. And nobody is coming for them, because true strength is not fists and not gangs. True strength is what you endured in silence. But nobody should ever have to be that strong.